world now where we're in a post-mainstream media world. That's pretty obvious. The algorithms are, and I'm about to say this, and it's going to sound conspiratorial, but I'm not, I don't actually mean it this way, which is that the algorithms are not just feeding people two completely different views of the world. Like, we're all training these algorithms to what we like, right? Those old globalists that trace back hundreds of years, even thousands of years, who think they run the world, like, they're not going to give up power lightly, and they're going to use every tool to their advantage, and they're going to, burn down nation states if they can. They've done it before. Why wouldn't they do it again? So we have to be aware that that's what's going on.
Welcome to Discourse with Christian. I'm your host, Christian White, and today's guest is a returning guest, Tom Luongo. Tom is the publisher of the Gold, Goats, and Guns newsletter, and it's awesome to have him back on again. Tom, how you doing?
I'm good, Christian. How are you? It's a lovely evening here in North Florida. If you can't, I hope you can't hear in the background my air conditioner running, but it's North Florida. It's May practically, so that means it's hot outside. So we're doing the thing. Having a cigar. It's a late evening. Doing the thing. Not bad.
Well, same over here. I'm for folks who don't know, I'm in Central California. It's starting to feel a bit warmer outside, so I can relate to you. Although we don't have quite the humidity, we have more of a dry heat over here.
Yeah, no, Florida, it just starts getting ugly in the afternoon. In about a month, it'll be inhospitable from the hours of about 11 to 5 every day. And I don't know how anybody gets anything done in this state during those times if they have to work outside. But kudos to the guys who are willing to actually work in it, because it beats me up anytime, all day, every day, for about 6 months. It's really rough, which is part of the reason why we're leaving. I can't handle the heat. I mean, it's not that I can't handle the heat. I just don't want to live in it anymore.
I hear you. Well, I'd love to start off asking you kind of your take as it relates to the global economy, financial markets, things of that nature.
Well, we just passed our first 100 days with, the latest iteration of Der Trumpenführer, because that's pretty much the way they're treating him, which is a lie, right? And I think the big takeaway from the first 100 days is they have a plan. They're executing on that plan. It's, some of it's not going to survive contact with the enemy, blah, 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 blah. But what I've also begun to realize, and I was chatting with Dexter White about this the other day, my partner in Gold, Goats, and Guns, and that, that the algorithms, we live in a world now where we're in a post-mainstream media world. That's pretty obvious. They tend to spend a lot of time trying to, look at me, I'm still relevant. And, they get an interview every once in a while and then they botch it. And then they, the boomers are still watching, but, they're aging out pretty quick, these people. But the bigger insight, I think, is that as far as social media feeds are concerned, it's pretty obvious that the algorithms are, and I'm about to say this, and it's going to sound conspiratorial, but I don't actually mean it this way, which is that the algorithms are not just feeding people two completely different views of the world. Like, we're all training these algorithms to what we like, right? I like, my YouTube feed is hilarious because there's almost no politics in it. So what do I get? I get videos about World of Warcraft and millennials reacting to Rush for the first time, and like all sorts of, because that's what I go to YouTube to decompress, right? I get, I get the charismatic voice, and I watch Elizabeth, go gaga over Dio or whatever it is, right? That's my YouTube feed, and YouTube has been trained to give me more of what I like. Well, that's what's happening politically. And I've even begun to notice this in my Twitter feed and whatnot, that I'm beginning to just get the same thing that everybody else gets, right? Now, part of that is because I don't really want to know what the other side is thinking, because they're crazy people. But at the same time, they're not searching out anything like on our side of the fence, or for our side of the algorithmic divide, because they don't want to hear anything that we have to say. So there's becoming this, like, really, it goes back to Scott Adams when he was talking about, two movies, one screen. They're seeing the same thing. We're watching the same thing, but there's two separate movies going through each of our heads. And it's very real. And, we all like to think that we're the keepers of reality. But the truth is that, of course, we're not. We're the keepers of our own version of reality. And that's what that whole reading list behind me is all about. So it it's important to remind yourself that sometimes you're dealing when you go out into the world, you deal with people who only get what they are searching for, that they have no frame of reference as to what you're talking about, as to what your position is. And that's why people are becoming more and more and more like entrenched in their version of reality, which is a dangerous thing to, it's a dangerous position to be in as a society. Now, of course, that's being amplified on purpose. Why? Well, we know why, because, this is how they're going to foment a societal collapse that they, and I'm being by they, I mean Davos, or, and those guys, those old globalists that trace back hundreds of years, even thousands of years, who think they run the world, like, they're not going to give up power lightly, and they're going to use every tool to their advantage, and they're going to burn down nation states if they can. They've done it before. Why wouldn't they do it again? So we have to be aware that that's what's going on, and then just when when Keith Olbermann says something really freaking stupid, don't react to it. Don't go, oh my God, look how dumb Keith is. No, ignore him. The best way to deal with a narcissist like him, Stephen King, Keith Olbermann, Joy Reid, I don't give a fuck. Pick whoever it is that like annoys you. Ignore them. If you don't react to them, you don't get them anymore, and they don't get an audience anymore. Their audience will be, because they only exist to be gatekeepers, to keep people from coming across the divide. So, I don't do a lot of boycotting, but I've always done boycotting of media people that I know are, promoting a narrative that is toxic to the society. For me, the first one that I boycotted was Bill O'Reilly when he used to be on Fox. I'm like, there ain't no way I'm retweeting anything or ever giving eyeballs or discussion to that fucking prick, because I won't do it, because I know exactly what he's doing, and it's reprehensible, and he's reprehensible, and he's this disgusting scumbag. I remember when that guy was on, Bill O'Reilly. He's always been that guy. So like, it was easy to see him in that vein. And we just have to realize that that's where we are today. It's not just not give the media their cookie and not give these people their cookie. It goes farther than that. In some ways, you do have to reach across the divide every once in a while, try and have a rational conversation, or at least insert yourself into a conversation with somebody else. And I ran into this morning with a kind of a classic Keynesian, like calling out Caitlin Long for, who said, with the GDP results, the GDP numbers that came out this morning. Oh, look, see that, what she said was the Trump administration should stop reporting GDP because it's a terrible statistic. And it's not, if you're cutting government spending, GDP is going to go negative because it's just a function of the math. Right. And, this I don't know, this idiot that I'd never seen before and you can always tell they're idiots because they do nothing but put their credentials in their Twitter profile. I used to be this and this and this and this and this, and I work here and I do this. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's nice. I have on the other side of it, I have no credentials in my Twitter profile on purpose, because it's about the content and not about the credentials. And I'm like, and he's like, well, that's not a good look to say that when GDP goes against you, you shouldn't report it. I'm like, that's not what she's saying. She's saying GDP is a bullshit statistic, and that's what matters. That it's just gross national spending. It's not a real thing. We stop government. If we stop spending, a whole lot of money in the government, we should expect GDP to go down, because government spending is part of the GDP calculation. Which, of course, at this point, this highly credentialed person told me that I didn't know what I was talking about. I'm like, dude, I can do math. Like, I have, I have a degree in chemistry. Like, and then I reminded him, like, oh, by the way, If we're talking about growth, we're talking about rate. I'm gonna I very skillfully brought up Arrhenius and a variety of other things, and anybody who wants to tell me that spending is is directly proportional to growth, economic growth, that's a lie. We know that's a lie. We know that is a lie. You can't draw that correlation. You know that if you were to try to generate real wealth creation growth by some metric versus GDP, that the R squared of the best fit line of those two of that data set over 50 years would not be anywhere close to even 0.5, no less 0.99, which is what they're saying. That would be a first order thing. It's like at least the second or third order interaction. It's dumb. So Caitlin was correct in saying, look, we shouldn't even discuss GDP anymore until we actually reform the mathematical model. It's basically what she was saying. Don't even talk about it, because you're changing the way the Trump administration is changing the way we do the math, right? The way we're funding the government and the way we're funding the allowing the economy to operate. And during the transition period, to talk about GDP, which is a highly politicized number in the first place, because they could make GDP go up tomorrow. That's how they did it during the Biden administration. They just printed a lot of money. And any growth you get from from something like that, where we know fundamentally that all money that government has is extracted from the private economy by definition. That's what it did. Government doesn't produce anything. It extracts money from the private economy, hands it to the public economy, and then spends it. That's always net extractive against growth, because you have to pay the bureaucrats to at least manage the money, right? Government, even if it's well run, has SG&A costs, balance sheet and corporate financing terms, right? So it's extractive. The only way government can add to growth is the deficit spend. Period. By definition, these are the terms. So is GDP negative print today for Q1? Is that positive or negative? Is that good for the country? Is that bad for the country? Is Trump's policies good or bad? Premise of the question is wrong. GDP is a bullshit statistic. It does not matter. So it's a rhetorical conceit I learned from my first semester economics professor, as a matter of fact. He used to give out multiple choice tests. Here's a problem set up, blah, 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 blah. Here, answer A, B, C, D, E, E. And E was almost always, the premise of the question is correct. This does not bear on that, whatever the question was about. Never saw that on a multiple choice question before, on a multiple choice test before, but it was a very interesting way of really testing the student's knowledge. Because if they understood, you can't now take the framework of the question as being true, which is the way you're supposed to, frame that discussion. Well, it's instructive for all forms of discussion, right? That you can take that to you can now apply that framework, that intellectual framework, that the rhetorical framework, and you can apply it to politics or sports or this or anything else, and then ask are we even asking the right questions with the right, parameters? So the long answer to your question is, Christian, everything's fine. The economy's reorganizing. The government, they've already told us, we're seeing money come in. The Treasury came out the other day and said they're going to need less borrowing. They're going to need to borrow less money in Q2 than they had originally anticipated by a lot. Hey, there's $100 billion saved. It's a good start. Is it enough? No. Is it a good start? Yes. Is this a process? Yes. Anybody who's saying, well, that's, it's a rounding error on a $7 trillion budget, I'm like, you're correct. Except now it's a $6.9 trillion budget. Now it's a 6.8. Now it's 6.5. And all the CBOE and all the CBO budget projections are now going, of the deficits are going to shrink. And when projected out over 10 years, like the good little technocrats that they are, none of that matters. Because one, we don't even account for the friggin' we don't even account for anything properly. And so when you dug into the GDP print this morning, you found out that, private investment went up by 21% and government spending went down by 4%. That's a win. Doesn't matter that the government spending pile is huge and the private investment pile is smaller, but a 21% growth rate in a smaller thing will eventually and you shrink the big one by, like, eventually those numbers will balance. And that's what you want to see. Isn't that what we want? Did we think that, we were just going to like snap our fingers and wave a magic wand and we fix the economy? We fix the government? If you think that, then I don't know what to tell you. Like, I'm going to just like kind of look at you and laugh and call you a spiritual boomer and be done with it. Because that's my phrase for the day. I resurrected an old phrase. I went back and read an old article of mine from my COVID about the end of spiritual boomerism and how we had told ourselves we created a riskless society. And I think this bears to the whole concept about Trump, because I think that article today is actually more relevant. I literally just tweeted it out before we hit record. Now than then, because the whole article was about how we've tried to create the riskless society. And that's what government spending and Keynesian economics and all this stuff is supposed to do. Like, when the economy turns down, the government's supposed to step in and lay off our risk by deficit spending in order to paper over the recession and keep everything running until the reorganization can happen. But of course, when the government spends like that, the reorganization never happens. And you just keep piling more malinvestment on top of more malinvestment on top of more malinvestment. And in this respect, I'm still very much an Austrian economist. And eventually you're going to get the crack-up boom, which is where we're pretty much headed into now. But only from a credit perspective, from a commodity. And so how do you defend yourself against a crack-up boom in credit markets and a credit expansion? Well, you reorient the economy towards production, not consumption. You reorient away from high taxes and sending money out and say, okay, you love our consumers so much, you want to dump your cheap fucking power tools on our markets? Great. They're not so cheap anymore. We want a cut of that profit. You spend $5 building that cheap friggin' battery operated drill that is going to last 1/3 the amount of time, or if we're lucky, as a Makita or as a DeWalt. Great, that's great. You're going to charge me $59 for it? That's great. No, you don't get $59. You don't get that $54 anymore. You get $24. We get $30. Deal with it. That's what's coming, because we need to rebuild so that DeWalt can now actually offer us a proper drill, not at $99, but it's $79. And at that point, I'm buying the DeWalt for $79 as opposed to the cheap Chinese one for $59. If I was building a house, I'd still buy the DeWalt for $99 anyway. But if I was just doing repairs around the house, I need a drill once a month, like, I'll buy the cheap Chinese one, right? I'm not building houses anymore. I'm not building outbuildings and fixing fences and trying to keep my goats penned in and all that shit where I need real power tools. I'm not that guy anymore. So.
Well, you're kind of reminded me. I have a landscape company for the audience that isn't aware and such, and you reminded me. I've been looking into getting skidsters for the recent business started, and you got the Chinese stuff that's pretty cheap, and then you've got the more high end name brands, if you will. So I'm having the same thinking as well with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real problem, right? It's a real decision that you make. I mean, when you're gonna, and that's where we have to get back to get away from all of these, false metrics, and stop thinking about GDP as this. And GDP is one of my pet peeves, because it's so easy because everybody knows what it is. So if you can blow a hole rhetorically in GDP as a concept, and you really start getting people thinking. I like to say that GDP is not gross national product, it's gross national spending. All we do is total up how much money we spent and then then we say that must be equivalent to growth, and therefore, and if spending is increasing, then that means this, and this. Well, it doesn't mean any of that shit, because it says we spent a whole lot of money. It doesn't say that we chose to spend more money on hookers and blow than we did on concrete and and fixing our bridges, or fixing the potholes or whatever, we spend on hookers and blow, and it all winds up in GDP the same exact way. So, as I was chatting with somebody about this very concept recently, and they reminded us that, the mom who stays at home to raise the kids isn't GDP positive. But if she puts the kids in daycare, even if she doesn't get a job, it's GDP positive, because she had to spend money to have somebody take care of her kids, as opposed to not spending that money on, right? And if they save that money, that's anathema. You can't save too much. What's wrong with you? Only like really terrible people would ever put the two words together, excess and savings. I'm sorry. Like, that's how the world is built, on a pool of real savings. You took real profit, not credit induced fake profit. Like, all of the boomers are sitting on that in their houses and their home prices and their stock market portfolios, which is why all the dumb Canadian ones just voted for Mark Carney. And somebody asked me the other day, like this morning, like, well, why did Carney win? It's because Canadian boomers are even dumber than American boomers. And it's true. And every Canadian boomer that's come back, he's like, yeah, we're really freaking stupid. Like, but if you understand the mindset, and that mindset is like, they don't care. They have wealth tied up in their 401ks. And they have wealth tied up in their home. And the impulse to preserve that wealth and hand it to their children isn't there. They didn't like their kids when they raised them and left them in front of the television set watching Gilligan's Island 40 years ago. Why the fuck would you ever expect those same people to pass their wealth on to their children tomorrow? My parents left me in front of the television set to watch Gilligan's Island because we were poor, but my parents weren't boomers. My parents were silent generation. They were the same generation that fought World War II. They just were born at the tail end of it. So my dad was literally turned 17 the year that World War II ended. So he couldn't fight, even though 3 of his older brothers did. Right? They were completely different people. My dad was born 28, for fuck's sake. Like, so, their goal was to try and leave as much generational wealth to their children as possible. But they didn't have anything. Like, they didn't have shit. These people didn't. I mean, they raised a family of 4 without a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of. But the generation that still thinks that they ended the war in Vietnam and got the Civil Rights Act passed, neither of which they did. Nixon ended the Vietnam War because we lost it. And the Civil Rights Act was a CIA operation. Like, are you kidding me? Like, they were always the playthings of globalists. And now in their dotage, like, they're being gaslit into being elbows up for sticking up to their Trumpenführer. It's just, if it wasn't so pathetic, I would actually laugh about it. But it's not. It has real world consequences. The real world consequences are that we can't get past these people in order to affect real political change. And now our enemies in, Davos and Brussels and City of London are using that in every way and spending whatever money they still have after we cut off their access to the magic money computers and USAID and everything else earlier. That was the greatest thing. I think that might be the greatest thing I've ever seen, by the way, in my entire life, other than like the Death Star blowing up when I was 10. Like, seminal moments. USAID gone. I'm like, oh my God. Like, where were you when USAID was destroyed and handed to the State Department? I was sitting in my office giggling. I will never forget it. Right? You know what I mean? Like, where were you when you saw the Death Star for the first time? Or where were you when Kennedy was shot, or when 9/11 happened? Well, as far as I'm concerned, this was a watershed moment in the history of the world. And so, for these people, like, they're their elbows up against the Trumpenführer, and they're just going to use that to try and block everything you possibly can in order to run out the clock on them, and then come back with a vengeance in 2026 or 2028, and then continue to run the table like they always have. And that's their plan, and it's very obvious what's going on here. So first 100 days have been fun. Next 100 days are going to be the war against Davos. They're already ginning it up. You can see them going for, we're going to, civil disobedience, and, they're going to start burning cities down and all the rest of it. We had a blackout in Spain the other day. You think that was just solar panels? No. Big fire in Tbilisi this morning. You go against Davos, they burn your city to the ground. 6 weeks later, they burn your city to the ground. Like, this is the way
like
this
the sack
works.
Of Rome or something.
What's that?
I'm thinking of
you're
like
a little
low,
Christian, and I'm going deaf. So,
how about now? Can you hear me now?
That's a little better. Thank you.
Okay, gotcha. No, I was mentioning you're making me think of like the sack of Rome or some of these different events that occurred. Right? Hey, you don't do this, we're gonna run you. We're
gonna do that. Yeah. No, absolutely. Like if you don't genuflect at the feet of St. George Floyd, then we're gonna burn Minneapolis to the ground. Like, mostly peaceful, city burning. Like, okay, like we're supposed to believe any of this shit? Like, come on, and when I saw that thing with the fire in Tbilisi this morning, I'm like, this morning or yesterday, I was like, oh, come on, like, it's just it's everywhere at this point. So.
Now, I wanted to ask you, because I know you've mentioned about bankers' wars and the global banking elite and things of that nature, and obviously you've mentioned Davos. If you could unpack that more and kind of share your thoughts and what's going on across the pond.
Sure. So to remind everybody, what I call Davos is the old colonial European banking clans or families or whatever you want to call it, and I've been having my model of that updated by Ian Burlingame and some conversations I've had with him and other people in recent days about where the history on that, goes, how that plays itself out. And I've got a podcast that I haven't published yet that I need to get out the door on this very thing. And they need, and they always have run, a system of destabilization, wealth extraction, collapse, moving on. The best way to look at these people, I think, is as locusts. They move into a territory, take it over from within, subvert its society, change its laws, change its rules, strip mine all the assets, and then pull all the capital out and move to the next place, right? The United States was supposed to be the next one on their list, along with what was left of the United Kingdom. And then they were going to shift to China. They're going to move everything into China, and then they're going to strip mine all of China and pull it out. And they've been, they tried it with Russia, and Putin stopped them. And it's very clear that they were trying it with the United States. And at some point in the past, I believe, in my read of things, and I don't know when it started, my incept date for this, or inception date for this, would be when Jerome Powell was put into the Federal Reserve, and he and John Williams then started to implement SOFR, giving us the end of the LIBOR system, which was the means by which they were controlling our monetary and our fiscal policy. But it could have been earlier than that, because in order to get to that moment, someone had to finally put the kibosh on Hillary Clinton becoming president. Now, it could have been happenstance that, she just ran a bad campaign and Trump beat her fair and square. It could have been that somebody was putting their thumb on the scale and cheating in Trump's favor at that point. I don't have any evidence of this. I'm just telling you something happened here. Because if our oligarch class, of our banking class, finally looked at what was over the horizon and didn't see a place for them at the table, then it would make sense for them to be incentivized to put up a resistance. How they would do that is always you fight these people financially, because fighting financially then gets travels down into the culture, travels down into the legal structure, travels down into the political system. But it all starts with the money flow. Control the money flow, you can then buy your way into all these other things. Or in this case, you can start to buy access to remove the sleeper agents and the traders and everything else from the institutions that already existed that have been corrupted. That's where we are now. Now we're at the maturation of the ability of that clique, that clan, whatever you want to call them, backing Trump to start removing all the cancer from the administration, from the government at every level, and all the institutions, including places like Harvard and all the rest of it. That's where we are in the whole. That's where we are in this process. We're not healed. We haven't healed the patient yet. The patient is just beginning to get healed, and it's going to be a longer process than maybe we had hoped in the flurry of activity in the Trump administration the first 100 days. But that's how you set tempo. What they did there was setting tempo in operational terms. You set operational tempo and then you maintain it for as long as you can. And I still think they have operational tempo. They're just now using the weekly news cycle to shift from issue to issue to issue while they make steady ground across every vector. They're not getting any definitive wins at this point, but they're making steady ground. Trump keeps pushing Davos to the point, for example, over Ukraine, to get Zelensky to come to the table and agree to a deal. And then Zelensky backs out at the last moment. Oh, I want this concession. No, you're not going to get that concession. Fuck you. No. Okay, well, and then, and they just keep playing that game and everybody's on a fucking yo-yo. Okay, great, whatever. But we're moving the ball forward because Putin is taking more and more territory and enforcing on the ground worse and worse and worse terms for Ukraine when they finally submit, if they ever submit. They're not going to submit until Davos submits. Davos isn't going to submit until we take other options off the table. That's just the way that's the way this works. All of these systems are interconnected. So while all that's going on, they're making strides in spending. Doge uncovers, bunches of, and it starts to uncovers a bunch of fraud, gets rid of it, takes all the low hanging fruit off out of the budget, and then starting to implement reform. While what do we see in the background? Oh, well, they'll never really, make any real inroads into the whole thing. And it was all just a dodge. They'll never find this much waste and fraud and everything else. Yeah, they will. Yeah, they will. You're just not going to hear about it until after we get the budget process taken care of, after we, after this happens and this happens and this happens and that happens. And I really do believe that. You got to remember that, like, the Office of Management, Russ Vogt over the Office of Management and Budget has been on a job for less than 30 days. He was the last one really to get his staff in place that he wanted. That only happened like 2 weeks ago. By the way, we're 100 days into the friggin' administration, and OMB doesn't have the staff they need to manage the friggin' money flow. Like, come on. Like, if you don't think that wasn't part of the plan, you don't know. I don't know. Maybe you still wear a mask in your car. Like, I don't know.
And just as a whole, I didn't mean to cut you out, but I was going to mention, as far as the Trump administration being able to effectuate the things that they want to, carry out, so on and so forth. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? On them being able to do that?
Like how far along are they on whatever their plan is?
Yes.
Oh, they're not very far along at all. They've only just started. Because Trump has already teased you with where we're going next. So we got tariffs, and they're negotiating trade deals, and they're desperately, and they've made, and the most important thing that they've negotiated so far was to get J.D. Vance into India, working with Modi, Prime Minister Modi, in order to get a trade the framework of the trade deal done there. Notice that when that happened, within 48 hours, Pakistan and India were on the verge of nuclear war. See,
Gotcha.
Vance shows up, he steps off the plane, MI6 goes into action. Nothing new, folks. You got old, deep relationships in that region of the world that go all the way back to the British Empire, and before that, the Dutch East Indies Company, and as well as the British East India Company. Like, you have to realize that those relationships are old and deep. And I've touched on this in the past, and the more I think about it, the more it's really important for people to realize that the politicians themselves they're not really setting a lot of these agendas. They can't, because money moves without their say so, and invariably, they're brought into a room and say, this is the way it's going to be done, and they're going to do that. So when you're trying to, in Trump's case, when you're trying to take that on and change that dynamic and say, oh no, it works like this now, not the way you used to, you expect them, of course, them to go, well, we'll see you in hell. We'll see you, we'll see you on the, hey, they're the Giants. We're the Giants. They're the Eagles, because I'm an old Giants fan. We'll see you on the pitch. We'll see you on the football field. We'll fight it out. We'll see who's got, and who's got the stones to win. They're going to fight, and they're fighting. And this is the way they fight. They fight by attacking our bond markets. They fight by attacking the equity markets. They fight by having control of the financial media, which people still don't realize is just as fake and gay as the political media. It's worse. It's more fake and gay. Bloomberg is not a trusted source of anything. Neither is the Wall Street Journal. Neither is any British newspaper, or the Financial Times, or the Economist, or any of these. None of them are worth a damn. Not one. So
obviously, you're oh, go ahead.
So what I'm going to say is, they have a plan, and it's very obvious. So the bits and pieces here are: get the trade deals done, start that process. Trump's already telling you what the next phase is. Oh, we're going to work on tax policy, and we're going to change the way we tax, the way we use the income tax. We're going to fund the government with other people paying us to have access to our markets. And you're not going to have to pay for the interest on the debt that these traders have issued. We're going to change the way we account for it, the way we issue money. We're going to change the way we do all of this stuff. We don't need $36 trillion worth of debt. We need, if we're going to issue treasury bonds, we need what, $4 or $5 trillion worth of treasury bonds to liquefy the friggin' to liquefy the money markets, the domestic money markets. Everybody else can go fucking hang. That's why the world is going to have offshore dollars that are priced at a far different rate than onshore dollars are. That's coming. And I know, and so few people have even begun to wrap their brains around this, but it's so obvious. Again, talking to Caitlin Long on my podcast a couple of weeks ago, last week about this, talked to Brent Johnson about it right after that, talked to Vince Lanci right after that. We did like 3 in a row where we really dug into these things, to these dynamics. And it's so very clear that we are going to defend the par price of the dollar at home, but not overseas. When in the old LIBOR system, it was designed for the Eurodollar system to defend par and force the Fed to do it for them. That dynamic has reversed itself. The Fed now defends par at home, and they got to pay a premium. Whatever that premium is, 5 basis points, 50 basis points, 300 basis points. That's fine. You're paying it, not us. That's what Trump is setting up. And if he sets that in motion and he does it properly, and he's even allowed to get half of that installed in the first 4 years, forget it. The whole world changes, like in a way that we have not experienced as humans from 400 years. Okay? 400 years worth of history here that we're talking about. That's how far this shit goes back. So you want sound money, you want private property rights, you want the dignity of the individual and everything else. Well, the first thing you got to do is you got to get rid of the people who are destroying the value of your money. First thing you got to do is start changing the dynamic of how we actually account for the way we do trade. The first thing we have to do is get rid of taxation of our income. The government is not entitled to our income. Period. Paragraph. End chapter. Story over. On that front, my libertarian brethren are still correct. We just can't go from here to there in a day. We have to do it, and we have to fund what government we're going to have in this world where there are still people out there who want our fucking heads, and we have to be able to defend ourselves. And we have the ultimate defense mechanism if we are willing to use it that way, and that is the Federal Reserve. Because it is the most powerful central bank in the world, alongside the U.S. Treasury, if they're working together to further to further the United States. Forget it. There are not two more powerful institutions on this planet today than the U.S. Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve if they're working together. Because you know how powerful they were when they were working together to hand the world to the globalists? Pretty fucking effective. Because they did it. During the Biden junta, they were at odds. They were at loggerheads. Now we're aligned. Now all we got to do is fix the politics and make sure that the Democrats never win a sizable election for the next 20 years. We need one-party rule in this country for about 20 years. Just like the Democrats needed one-party rule to instantiate globalism through and soft communism. It's what they did. It's what FDR was. It's what Truman was. It's what the GOP was broken for 30 years. People forget this. We had a one-party system in the United States for all intents and purposes for an entire generation. And the boomers got to play they got to play as the philanthropists in a world where we were rebuilding the world. Because we were the only ones standing. We were the only ones with an industrial production capacity.
Yeah, it is remarkable what transpired after the Second World War, and what the folks did from the 60s and 70s and on, what it's created today.
I mean, it was, and I mean, to really put a point on this, it was the growth of the offshore dollar system that destroyed the country, that destroyed America. It's what bankrupted us. We're not bankrupt, by the way, though. We're just bankrupt in terms of balance sheet. You can fix the processes of how much money is going out the door. Fixing the fiscal side of the balance sheet is not hard. It just takes will. The asset side and the liability side of the balance sheet, that's a trickier subject, but not really. Talked about this in the past. How much money, are we really $39 trillion in debt? Or is some of that debt owed to entities that are going to get bankrupted, and then we don't owe that money to them anymore? Oops. More importantly, have we written assets down on the national balance sheet to zero on purpose in order to make our fiscal position look worse than it is? Has anybody ever heard of the Alaska National Wildlife Preserve? That's worth trillions of dollars. Trillions. And it's worth zero right now. Book value, trillions. Balance sheet value, zero. Fucking zero. It's a travesty that we sit here. The United States is done. Fucking, okay, really? You looked at our oil reserves. You looked at our mineral reserves. You looked at our lead in technology and AI and this, that, and everything. Oh, really? Yeah, we have enough copper in this country to rebuild the electricity grid. We have enough oil, gas, coal, this to power the country for 1,000 years. And then Alaska is just sitting there with mineral wealth across the periodic table. And I get news for you. By the end of Trump's term, we will also own most of British Columbia, Alaska, Alberta, and Saskatchewan at a minimum. At a minimum. Or Mark Carney's going to bend the knee. And, given the fact that I don't know, why are all these people married to people who are really, really mannish? I mean, I don't know how dirty you're going to allow me to be, but I'm like, I just want to pull out the old Bill Hicks joke. Like, you know what I mean? Like, Mark Carney's going to be, but I can't do that one. I can't do that one anymore. I'm not allowed. I've been told I'm not allowed to do that joke anymore. But no, I mean, seriously, like at some point, either Mark Carney's going to bend the knee. He's going to find out that, yeah, dude, you have an economy smaller than Texas. We own you. We invade you with like 4 tanks and some deer hunters from the Upper Peninsula, and you're done. Like, because what? You think Alberta is going to come to defend Ottawa after what happened on Monday? I know there's people in Alberta. No. Same thing with Saskatchewan. So you get the Athabasca Basin, which is where all the uranium is. You get all the oil. You get Kitimat, the export terminal at Kitimat. You form a land bridge between the lower 48 and Alaska. James Polk is like laying in his grave cheering, 54-40 or fight, 54-40 or fight. Like, come on, dude. It's like the most hilarious freaking thing imaginable. You remember that? Like, I remind people about that. I don't even know. I was talking to a guy the other day. He's like, I've never even heard of James Polk. I'm like, from my high school, I'm like, my high school days, I'm like, we're learning about, 19th century American politics. I'm like, that dude was a badass. He ran on the most obnoxious campaign of all time. Canada doesn't get to have anything. We're taking everything up to the 54th parallel, or we're going to war with them. I'm like, okay. Like, I like this guy. I like Canada. Don't get me wrong. Like, a big hockey fan, huge Rush fan. Like, I like my cheap Canadian sci-fi. Like, I'm friends with, I'm Twitter fans with one of the creators of Stargate SG-1. Like, I get it. Like, you know what I mean? But at the end of the day, don't ever forget that without us, you don't have a country. Like, I'm sorry, you don't. And you guys know it. So get over your inferiority complex, your inferiority complex, and just, admit the fact that, like, yeah, we're a little loud and obnoxious. It doesn't mean it doesn't matter. We're still the same people. You're just like, more Minnesotan than Minnesota. I kid. I shouldn't say that. No, I mean, seriously, like, like, let's just not have that. The animosity is nonsense. Like, we welcome you. The only time I get really angry with Canadians is when they try to drive in Florida. And then I'm like, no. You guys have got to go back. Like, go, you guys have to take an actual driving test and learn how to drive. But other than that, they're very nice people. So.
As it relates to commodities, and
I don't know that you were. By the way, I'm not sure if you expected that rant, but that was.
No,
that's what you get for 6 o'clock in the evening. By the way.
Well, you mentioned about obviously minerals, resources, things of that nature. I wanted to get your thoughts on things like gold, silver, copper. If you can kind of unpack that and anything of that nature.
I mean, gold is clearly in a bull market because of geopolitical risk, a mixture of geopolitical risk and the need by the United States to rebalance again its assets on its balance sheet, right? And that's, I think, where we are. It was Brent Johnson and I were talking about this the other day, and I bring Brent up because he's the only other person I know of who actually thinks like I do. And it's not that I'm trying to name drop or anything. It's just the person I happen to have this conversation with, which is that everybody's worried about that there isn't any gold in Fort Knox. The thing you should really be worried about is that there's more gold in Fort Knox than you think there is, and that we don't have on the Fed's balance sheet. What if the United States has, a couple of thousand tons more gold than we say we do. Everybody assumes that we don't. Because for years, we were actively involved in the suppression scheme to keep the price of the dollar down. But that was during the globalist days. Keep the price of gold down in order to elevate the dollar. They controlled the Eurodollar system. They controlled par. They controlled City of London and the gold trade. Like, an actual, honest to God, United States working for itself would want a higher gold price. Especially if we're so in debt and we have all these unfunded liabilities and this, that, and everything else. Like, wouldn't you want a higher gold price to offset some of those balance sheet anomalies? I would think so. And if you look at the intraday trading on gold, you'll see that all the weakness comes between the hours of 3 a.m. and 8:30. That's the London Open and the New York Open. It's no longer on the New York Open and to the New York close. And then the Asian markets would open, and in times past, the Asian markets would open, gold would rise, and then it would top out during London, and then it would get crushed during New York. That was the cycle every day, over and over and over again, nearly every day. Now, that's gold. If peace breaks out between Russia and Ukraine, if Trump is able to get not just a ceasefire, but a durable peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine, and actually gets Zelensky to submit, or someone in the Ukrainian government, maybe not Zelensky, maybe he's removed from the scene and somebody else is elevated to sign on the dotted line and get this done, which is what I think is going to happen. Gold will probably be done for most of the rest of the year, until there's a sovereign debt crisis that then starts to occur in Europe. Because look, if Trump gets peace in the Middle East, it's going to, or in the Ukraine and the Middle East, it's going to cause a sovereign debt crisis in Europe. Their capital at that point will have no other choice but to look at Europe as having no future. And money will start to flee Europe like the old adage, like rats leaving a sinking ship. Right? That's gold. Silver, industrial metal. Everybody's still handicapping a recession. Silver futures curve is now talking, sub 3% interest rates within 18 months. Everybody's talking recession because of tariffs and this, that, and everything else. That sells, the silver oil trade right now is selling the global recession narrative. So copper is actually really quite volatile. It was off 30 cents this morning on the GDP numbers, which was an insane move in copper. It was pushing back up towards $5 a pound. I firmly think copper is going to go much higher, along with the rest of the base metals, especially if the United States gets off the schneid, right? And, we really start to change the way we handle capital internally, and we get real investment and growth. We continue to see G shrink and private investment rise, and those numbers start to balance themselves out, right? Then you're going to see an upward demand on all commodity prices, all the way across the board. And then Jerome Powell is going to be in a pickle, because he will not want to raise interest rates into a rising commodity market where we have rising commodity cost push inflation, which is part of the reason why the Trump administration so desperately wants oil prices down. But the best way for Trump to get oil prices down is to do two things. Three things. He's got to do, and he's doing all of them, except for the last one. Streamline the permitting process to get new oil refineries on the market. Get rid of the electric vehicle mandate, which he's already done, but get rid of all of that and get rid of the CAFE standards. Just allow the car companies to start building simpler cars. So get rid of 90% of the insane safety regulations and adding weight to cars and the emissions regulations and all that stuff. All that has to go away, or at least be rolled back to mid 90s levels, right? I mean, cars are so friggin' bloody, emission free at this point that it's just stupid. Like we've doubled the price of the car in order to get that last, order of Pareto improvement on, against the Clean Air Act, for cleaning up tailpipe emissions. It's dumb. It's just not cost effective. We should roll that back, and that would dramatically start to drop the price of automobiles, and then get rid of the ethanol blending, corn-based ethanol blending, and biodiesel regulations. Get that out of the market. Get refineries up and running. Get refinery capacity up and running, and you'll watch the price of gasoline as a function of the price of oil drop like a rock domestically, which is what we need. Do all that, and the rest of it will take care of itself. And the Fed will then be able to maintain 3.5% on the Fed funds rate, or 3% on the Fed funds rate, and won't have to go back to the zero bound. We won't have a credit crisis. Blah 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 blah. That's what I think. I'm not saying that's not an easy fix. That's an 18-month fix at a minimum, right? Just to get like the oil refineries that are on the drawing board and stuck in permitting hell, getting them, into construction will take, even if they were to start construction tomorrow, right, or, continue construction tomorrow, would still take 18 months. But there's a couple of them that are getting through this, we're getting through the system even so. So we just need to get refinery capacity back up to, we need to add 5 million barrels a day of refining capacity. I'll be honest with you, it's our freaking superpower. I was looking into this the other day. I was like, Zero Hedge ran a really good article about, China thinks they have us over a barrel about rare earths. So like, yeah, but we have you over a barrel about ethane, because we own 50% of that market. We own 50% of the ethanol market too, by the way. We own 50% of the ethane derived or ethylene derived precursors, ethylene diamine, ethylene oxide, ethylene chloride, like all that stuff. Like that's all the United States, by the way. We own like 50% of those markets. Like that's what we export to the world. We bring in oil from the rest of the world because we'd rather refine that stuff than our own to make gasoline and diesel fuel with. And we take the stuff we make, we produce, and we send it out the door as value-added products. We take value-added products and then we use the profits from that to go buy everybody else's shitty oil. That's the oil market in the United States, in a nutshell.
Yeah, I'd be curious if J. Paul Getty were around, what his thoughts would be on that. What are some other topics or things that you feel are not talked about very much, or perhaps some things that you're starting to see on your radar that you'd like to dispense to the audience?
Things that are not really talked about, that need to be talked about. My two big pet peeves are the whole really, I already covered the big ones for me. Like, we have to change the way we price transportation in the United States. It was fundamentally designed from the ground up to bankrupt the country. And then, we've got issues, up and down the line. The healthcare system was designed with a Byzantine, Kafkaesque set of rules to destroy healthcare. We call it, for short, we call it Obamacare. That needs to go away, like completely. We have a healthcare system that's more obsessed. It's only obsessed with billing, not with actually delivering care. That has to end. I think, I don't know. Like, there's not, like, transportation is at the heart of everything. Like, all of our costs are really derived from the way we handle capital in order to move shit from place to place. And this is America. America's big. It's, we've got ports, we got, 3,000, we got ports on, the geography of the United States it implies that we have to have a competent road and rail, competent road and rail transportation network. And we have to be able to make that has to function at the lowest price imaginable. And putting roadblocks up for outdated concepts such as for not outdated concepts of pollution, but what I mean by is like we've solved the pollution problem in the U.S. We've solved the pollution problem in many ways, not always, but in many ways. We've solved like the clean air stuff. Is like air is cleaner now than it's ever been, and you know we've got to get past this idea that we can't have anything, we can't go backwards, that we haven't overdone it. We have overdone it in a lot of areas. We've absolutely overdone it in a lot of areas. I mean, I'm still angry with Dieselgate, for Christ's sake. The Volkswagen was like, game the stupid test because the test was dumb and the standard was dumb. And they couldn't sell friggin' diesels into the market that people wanted. And when those engines were warm and up and running, they weren't producing any particulate matter. But the test was designed to disadvantage traditional diesel engines on purpose in order to get them off the market. It was purely legislative, to my friend Jim Kunstler's fuckery. And we just need to like get over ourselves and get away from the spiritual boomerism, that we can have growth without risk, that we can have a world without pollution or consequence. Like we exist, we're real, and and life is change. And we're not going to, if you want a better mousetrap built, the way to build that better mousetrap is not to bind down the existing market to allow investment to other markets. It doesn't work that way. You let everybody compete, period. But you don't subsidize the old industry, and you don't allow them to put up legislative barriers to entry to new technology, and you allow new technology to flourish and try and compete in the open market. We used to believe in this shit, and it used to work really well. And then the commies took over, and now we're here. And we just need to stop listening to our inner commie that we were all indoctrinated with. Fuck that guy. He's bad for you. Do your seance, have your little therapy session, have your 5 stages of grief, I don't know, get the little doll of him and then burn him in effigy and move on with your life. Like, there's nothing good that comes from egalitarian thinking at all. Nothing. Only misery and pain. Unless you love misery and pain, or you're a sadist and you like inflicting it, then it's good for you. But I'm not a sadist. I am an asshole, but I'm not a sadist. So there you go. I think we should end there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, well, Tom, really appreciate having you on. For those in the audience who aren't aware of how they can learn more about you and get in touch,
I don't know if after that rant, I'm not sure anybody would want to learn anything more about me. That was probably a little more revealing than it probably should have been. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728. You can sign up for the Patreon at Patreon/GoldGoatsAndGuns. I'll do a rant like this plus market analysis twice a week, along with the monthly newsletter where my partner and I, Dexter White, try to look ahead as to where this whole thing is headed on a regular basis, along with a portfolio strategy to give you a sense of how to, where you should be looking at putting your money and how to construct a portfolio, conceptually in these times. The website where I aggregate the podcast, and every once in a while, if I decide to write an article, like I used to in the past, 4 times a week, not anymore. You go to the blog over goldgoatsandguns.com or tomluongo.me.
Well, Tom, appreciate you coming on, and again, looking forward to having you on down the road.
Well, I hope we'll see what kind of mood I'm in when that happens. You never know what you're going to get. Like I never know what I'm going to put on the table when we start one of these things. I just, it's like, as my friend Dave Collins says, let's grip it and rip it. Let's just see what happens. You know what I mean? And sometimes it's great, and sometimes it's sometimes it is what it is. So I appreciate the invite, Christian. It was fun to talk to you, and we'll do it again.
Absolutely.